It was the third time this month. A man dressed in a fake police uniform was climbing over my backyard fence again. But this time, Grandpa wasn't just watering plants or reading his newspaper. No, he was doing something a bit more interesting. He was wiring the electric fence. I never thought much of Grandpa's backyard projects, until now. He'd always been handy with tools, but lately it seemed like he was preparing for something much more than gardening. The HOA thought they were clever. They sent this guy, pretending to be a cop, to break into our house. He was just doing their dirty work, thinking he could intimidate us. But Grandpa had other plans. When the man touched the gate, blue sparks flew like lightning, and we heard him scream like a man who had just been hit by a truck. The whole neighborhood heard it. The fake cop fell back, cursing, but by then, it was too late. Grandpa's plan was already in motion. The cameras had caught everything. Grandpa sat back in his chair on the porch, sipping his tea, watching the whole thing unfold. But that was just the opening move in Grandpa's plan. He wasn't done yet. Now you might be wondering, what the heck is going on here? Why would the HOA go to such lengths? And why did Grandpa wire his own fence like some kind of secret agent? Stick around because this fight is about to get way more intense, and trust me, you'll want to see how this all plays out. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with anyone who's ever dealt with a corrupt HOA or felt like they were being targeted. I should have realized something was off about Grandpa when I saw him humming as he dug holes in the backyard, seriously focused on his work. Grandpa was always a bit quirky, but this time it felt different. He was 78 years old, retired, and had lived in the same lakeside house for over 40 years. Most folks his age would have spent their days napping, watching TV, or enjoying the peace of their retirement. Not Grandpa. He had a way of keeping busy, and not just with simple hobbies. He was always tinkering, always making sure his home was secure, always looking for ways to improve things. I never really questioned him, until now. His house sat on 2 acres of prime real estate. The view of the lake? Absolutely breathtaking. But as soon as the lake became popular and the area around it became a hot spot for development, the predators started circling. The developers, the real estate sharks, they all started eyeing Grandpa's land. They wanted it, badly. They just didn't know who they were dealing with. Everything went downhill 6 months ago when Karen Miller was elected as the new HOA president. From the moment she took charge, she made it clear she wasn't there to keep the peace. She was there to control. Karen was the kind of woman who would measure grass with a ruler and issue fines for Christmas lights that were left up past January 2nd. I thought it was just the usual HOA overreach, but Karen took things to a whole new level. The first few letters were typical. A couple of warnings about the lawn being a little overgrown, a few notes about our fence paint peeling, and one about an old shed that needed a coat of paint. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then things started getting strange. Karen sent an official-looking letter that said we were violating HOA rules regarding property compliance. But when I looked closely at the letter, I realized there were no specifics, just a bunch of legal-sounding nonsense. No citations, no explanations. I had a feeling this wasn't about some fence or lawn. It was about something bigger. But it got worse. A few days later, 2 guys, dressed like cops, showed up at our front door. They claimed to be with local law enforcement. But when I looked at them closely, I noticed a few odd things. They were wearing Nike sneakers and carrying plastic radios that looked like toys. Real cops don't wear sneakers that flashy. And real cops don't carry plastic radios that don't work. This was when I started to think that maybe we weren't just dealing with a regular HOA president. Karen Miller was hiding something, and I was starting to get suspicious. The next time the fake cops showed up, they were climbing over our fence and trying to break in through the back. I'm not sure what Karen thought she was going to accomplish, but Grandpa did. Now you may be asking, why did Karen go this far? What was she really after? Well, Grandpa had been preparing for something like this for a while now. And that fake cop who got shocked by the electric gate wasn't the only thing Karen should have been worried about. You see, Grandpa had a secret plan, and it wasn't just about keeping the goats safe. He wasn't just installing an electric fence for fun. He was setting a trap, and Karen was about to walk right into it. Grandpa wasn't just sitting idly by while Karen and her fake cops made their moves. No, he had been preparing, and now I could see it all starting to unfold. After the electric shock incident, Grandpa didn't even seem fazed. In fact, he just smiled and sipped his tea. "Well, I guess we're in for a ride," he said, as if everything was just part of a regular Tuesday. But me, I was freaking out. Karen and her team weren't just playing around anymore. They were serious about taking our property. By the next morning, Grandpa had installed motion detectors, hidden cameras, and low-voltage electric fencing all around the house. His plan wasn't just to stop people from breaking in anymore. It was to set a trap, to show Karen and her HOA goons that she couldn't push him around. When I asked Grandpa how he knew all this stuff, he just laughed. When you've been in building inspection as long as I have, you learn a thing or two about property security and the laws behind it. I was beginning to understand. Grandpa wasn't just a retired inspector. He was a strategic mastermind. Quietly, watching and waiting for the perfect moment, Karen Miller's harassment didn't stop. It only got worse. She sent more letters, each one demanding something new, something bigger. First, it was a fine for having too many dead leaves in the yard. Then, it was an accusation about the shed in the backyard, claiming it was an illegal structure. Even though Grandpa had built it decades ago with a proper permit, the HOA's interference was relentless. But when Karen's team of fake cops showed up again, trying to break into the house at midnight, I realized we were far beyond regular HOA disputes. This wasn't about property codes anymore. It was about someone trying to force us out, and Karen was using her HOA power to make it happen. I had been watching the house for weeks, but that night, the situation escalated. Grandpa's fence and security system were working perfectly. The intruder, who tried to climb the gate again, got a nasty surprise. Grandpa had fine-tuned the electrical system to perfection. When the intruder touched the gate, the shock wasn't just a little jolt. It was enough to send him flipping backward, screaming in pain as he collided with the birdbath in the yard. I was watching from the window, and I could barely contain my laughter. That's when Grandpa, looking as calm as ever, said, "That'll teach him to mess with my fence." But Grandpa didn't just zap them and call it a day. No, he had set up a system, a double-layered defense. As the man scrambled to get up, sprayers, hidden in the yard, released a fine, invisible spray across the entire area, coating everything and marking the intruder with a fluorescent compound. This wasn't just for fun, it was evidence. Under a UV light, the substance would make it impossible for the intruder to hide, linking him directly to the crime. This wasn't the first time Grandpa had dealt with people like this, and I realized just how much I had underestimated him. I was starting to understand that this was no ordinary land grab. Karen wasn't just trying to scare us. She was using the HOA as a tool to force us into selling. The real estate development company, Greenstone Corp, had already made their intentions clear. They wanted our property. Our lakeside home was prime real estate, and I knew Karen had been working with them for months, but I couldn't understand why. What did they want with an old house and an overgrown yard? Grandpa was starting to connect the dots. He noticed that the intruder had blood on his sleeve, the same guy who had been sent by Karen's team. He wasn't just a random burglar. He was part of a larger operation trying to get access to something very specific. The more Grandpa pieced it together, the more it became clear. Karen and her cronies had been running a fraudulent operation. They were sending fake cops to retrieve files Grandpa had kept from an old investigation he had done back in Niwa, the day. But there was something deeper at play. This wasn't about land. It was about revenge. Karen Miller's revenge on Grandpa for exposing her corruption in a previous building fraud investigation years ago. I never knew the full story about what Grandpa had done, but Karen Miller clearly did. She knew Grandpa had evidence, and she knew that if anyone ever found out about it, it could destroy everything she had built. The HOA president had become a dangerous woman, willing to stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Now, with all the evidence Grandpa had been collecting, we weren't just sitting back and waiting for Karen to strike again. We were preparing for the final showdown, and Grandpa wasn't just defending his home. He was about to take the fight to Karen. The moment Grandpa set his trap and the fake cop got shocked by the electric gate, I knew we were in the middle of something much bigger than a typical HOA dispute. Karen Miller wasn't just some neighborhood nuisance. She had become a force to be reckoned with, willing to stop at nothing to push us off our property. But Grandpa, the retired building inspector with decades of experience, was no stranger to these kinds of battles. The trap was set. But as the fake cop writhed on the ground, Grandpa didn't rush to call the police or jump into action. Instead, he calmly sipped his tea and said, "It's about to get interesting now." I watched as Grandpa surveyed the scene, assessing every detail. He knew what he was doing. Grandpa wasn't just trying to stop the intruders, he was playing the long game. His system was designed to work perfectly, the electric fence to keep them out, the UV marking compound to track their every move, and the cameras that caught everything. But there was more. Grandpa had eyes on everything, tracking each movement, each noise, calculating every outcome in his mind. As we inspected the intruder's belongings, I saw the tool he dropped, a lockpicking kit, along with a small electronic device. I knew this wasn't some random thief. This was a well-trained operative, someone hired to break in and get what they needed, the files Grandpa had kept from an old investigation. "They're after my inspection records," Grandpa said, his voice calm but full of anger. "These papers, these documents, they could expose Karen, and she knows it." I didn't understand at first. But Grandpa wasn't just protecting the house. Karen Miller, the HOA president, wasn't just trying to get rid of us for some petty violation. No. She was using her position of power to push for a real estate deal, one where she and her developer friends would make a fortune if they could force Grandpa out. The house, our home, sat on 2 acres of prime lakefront property, a gold mine. And Karen, using the HOA, had been trying to drive us out under the power guise of enforcing neighborhood rules. Karen's tactics went beyond normal HOA overreach. She had sent fake cops to retrieve those sensitive inspection records, the ones Grandpa had kept after exposing a fraudulent development project years ago. Grandpa had exposed corruption back then, and now Karen was making sure no one would dig into the past that could destroy her career. That's when it hit me. Grandpa wasn't just defending his home, he was protecting a legacy. The documents in those old files could bring down Karen Miller and the corrupt developers she was working with. Grandpa had been sitting on a gold mine of evidence, and that's why she was going to such extremes to get those papers. We weren't just victims anymore. Grandpa had a plan, and it wasn't just about defending the house. It was about exposing Karen's entire operation. He knew this wouldn't be easy. The HOA was just a front for something much darker, a real estate scheme designed to acquire properties at cut-rate prices through fraud and intimidation. It was sophisticated, and Karen had been pulling strings for months. That's when Grandpa decided to take action. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Karen Miller showed up at the house. She came with her usual entourage, 2 men in business suits, probably lawyers or bodyguards hired to intimidate. They stood like statues by her side, clearly expecting to take control of the situation. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I'll admit, I was nervous. The last time Karen came around, she nearly pushed us off our land with her false accusations. This time, though, Grandpa was calm. Too calm. He didn't even flinch when they knocked at the door. Instead, he opened it slowly, as though he was welcoming them for tea. "Miss Miller," Grandpa said, his voice even, "what can I do for you today?" Karen's fake politeness was almost laughable. "Mr. Chandler, we're here to address the issues with your property," she said, her eyes scanning the surroundings, likely making mental notes of what she could use against us. "Your recent security measures are problematic. You violated HOA rules once again. This is your last warning." Grandpa raised an eyebrow. "Violating rules? Funny. I didn't see those rules in the HOA charter. You know, it's funny, Miss Miller. I used to look at the HOA rules all the time, but it seems you've rewritten a few things." She didn't like that. Her smile faltered. But Grandpa wasn't done. "I know what you're up to. You think you can get away with stealing people's homes, using the HOA as your personal weapon. It's not going to work with me. You've been using those fake cops to try and scare me into selling, but it's not going to happen. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you're up to." She froze. For a split second, I thought she might snap back, but she didn't. Instead, she did what most cowards do. She tried to shift the blame. "You're creating chaos in this community. You're a danger to everyone here." Grandpa's response was calm, but deadly. "If you're so concerned about safety, why don't you explain why your fake cops are trying to steal from people? Or better yet, why you're trying to intimidate elderly homeowners into selling their homes under duress? It's not a good look, Karen. The truth is coming out." And that's when I saw it in her eyes. Fear. Karen knew she was losing control. But she wasn't going to go down quietly. The next phase of this fight was about to get even darker. And I had a feeling that Grandpa's next move was going to shake the very foundation of Karen's corrupt empire. Karen Miller didn't take kindly to being exposed. I could see the color draining from her face as Grandpa calmly laid out the truth, piece by piece. It wasn't just about property violations anymore. It was about something much bigger, a scheme involving the HOA and a real estate development company that was out to grab properties from unsuspecting homeowners like us. Karen's usual bravado started to crack as Grandpa pushed forward. "You see, Karen, you've made one fatal mistake," Grandpa said, his voice steady but sharp. "You thought you could intimidate me, push me out and steal my land. You're wrong." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen, flanked by her two lawyers, tried to regain her composure, but I could tell she was rattled. Grandpa had hit a nerve, and now she was trying to cover her tracks. "What exactly are you talking about?" Karen spat, trying to maintain control of the situation. Her tone was defensive, but underneath, I could hear the panic creeping in. She had been caught. Grandpa didn't flinch. "I know everything, Karen. Your fraudulent real estate deals, your fake cops, your little conspiracy with Development Solutions, Inc. I have all the evidence right here." Grandpa reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick file. It was a collection of emails, photos, and documents, everything he had gathered over the past few weeks. He laid it all out on the coffee table, letting Karen see the damning evidence. Watched as Karen's face twisted in disbelief, but she quickly masked it with a scowl. "You think this is going to work? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" she sneered. Grandpa smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was more like the smile of someone who had seen this kind of thing before and knew it was over. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and now so does everyone else." The air was thick with the realization that Karen's power was about to crumble, but she wasn't done. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her footing. "You think—" "You've won! This is just the beginning! You have no idea what kind of forces you're up against!" Development Solutions has connections all over this state. Lawyers, politicians, judges. They'll shut you down. But Grandpa was already 2 steps ahead. "I've dealt with bigger forces than you, Karen. Do you really think I haven't prepared for this? Your fake cops, your shady real estate deals, your illegal actions, they're all about to come to light." The doorbell rang, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. I turned to Grandpa, confused, but he just nodded toward the door. Karen's face went pale, and she shifted uneasily in her seat. She knew something was coming, but she had no idea what Grandpa had been planning. She started to stand up, but Grandpa raised a hand, signaling her to stay put. Don't worry. Karen, you won't be going anywhere, Grandpa said, his tone firm. The front door swung open, and in walked Detective James Collins, a local investigator Grandpa had known for years. Detective Collins wasn't just an ordinary cop. He had worked with Grandpa in the past, investigating corruption and fraud in the area. Collins nodded to Grandpa before looking directly at Karen and her lawyers. Karen's face fell. She knew this wasn't going to end well. Karen Miller, Detective Collins said, his voice cold. You're under investigation for fraud, property manipulation, and illegal activity involving Development Solutions, Inc. I have a few questions. For you. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but Detective Collins raised a hand, stopping her before she could say a word. We have all the evidence we need, Karen. You've been caught, and your connections are about to come under heavy scrutiny. You'll be hearing from us very soon. The two lawyers standing beside Karen looked just as stunned as she was. They hadn't seen this coming. They had been blindly following her, believing she was still in control. But now, the entire conspiracy was falling apart. Karen's face twisted in rage, but she couldn't do anything. The game had changed, and she was losing. I'm not finished here, she shouted, standing up. But before she could take a step, Grandpa held up a hand, his calm demeanor never faltering. No, Karen, you're done. This is over. As Karen and her lawyers were escorted out, Grandpa turned to me, a twinkle in his eye. You see, there's always a way to fight back. You just need to be smart, patient, and know when to strike. But even though we had won this round, I knew the battle wasn't over. Karen had made too many powerful enemies, and now she was desperate. The final showdown was yet to come, and I wasn't sure who would come out on top. The moment Karen and her lawyers were escorted out of Grandpa's house, I could feel the weight of the situation lift. But it wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Grandpa stood by the window, his eyes scanning the driveway where the cars were parked, their lights still flashing. The neighborhood was quiet, but there was a sense of victory in the air. We've exposed her, but this won't be the end, Grandpa said softly, his voice full of determination. Karen's going to try everything she can to come after us again. But we've got the truth now, and truth has a funny way of winning in the end. Karen Miller, once so confident, was now defeated, her facade crumbling under the weight of the evidence Grandpa had carefully gathered. The fake cops, the illegal property deals, the harassment, everything was laid out for the world to see. She had been exposed as a fraud, and the development company she was working with was now under investigation for racketeering, fraud, and intimidation. But Karen's connections weren't just going to disappear. Her last-ditch effort was to shut Grandpa down in front of the entire community, but she underestimated the power of truth. She never saw Detective Collins coming. We sat at the kitchen table as Grandpa opened a stack of documents, court orders, arrest warrants, and notes from federal investigators. His face was calm, but I could see the relief in his eyes. After months of dealing with the pressure from Karen and the HOA, the truth had finally come out, and there was no turning back. I told you, kid, Grandpa said, looking at me with that trademark smirk. You just have to be patient. Make them play their hand and let them expose themselves. The final showdown. It was only a matter of days before the community meeting Karen had arranged came to a head. The room was packed, and the tension in the air was palpable. Karen had planned to make the neighborhood turn against Grandpa, painting him as a dangerous, paranoid man. But now, everything had shifted. She had nowhere left to hide. The new HOA board, along with the neighbors who had once feared her, now stood firmly on Grandpa's side. Everyone was there to support him, and the community finally saw Karen for what she truly was: a fraud, a manipulator, and someone willing to destroy lives for a chance at power. As Karen tried to speak, I could see her panic. The smoke and mirrors she had built her life on were no longer working. Grandpa's evidence was undeniable. The crowd was quiet, but I could feel the shift. It was no longer Karen who controlled the room. It was Grandpa. With the federal investigation officially underway, Karen's involvement in the scam was fully exposed. As the community voted to remove her from the HOA, the weight of what she had done to everyone came crashing down. The fake cops, the threats, the intimidation, it all came back to haunt her. Victory for Grandpa was sweet. But it wasn't just about exposing the corruption. It was about the community coming together, standing up for each other, and realizing that truth and justice always find a way. As the HOA meeting ended and Karen was escorted out, Grandpa leaned back in his chair and sighed, a satisfied look on his face. The battle was over, but there was more than just relief in his expression. "This house isn't just a piece of land," Grandpa said, his voice softer now. "It's a memory. Your grandmother used to sit on this porch with me, and that's the only part of her I have left. If I had lost this place, I'd have lost her forever." I understood then. It wasn't just about land or property. It was about legacy, family, and fighting for what's right. Grandpa didn't just win because of his intelligence or his careful planning. He won because he had something worth fighting for, something real, something valuable. The neighborhood came together in the end, and Karen was never seen again. The developers went back to the drawing board, and the HOA returned to its original purpose, helping the community, not controlling it. Have you ever fought back against a corrupt system, or stood up for what you believed in, even when it seemed impossible? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed seeing justice served, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need a little inspiration to stand up to the challenges they're facing. This story isn't just about property or power. It's about standing your ground and never giving up.